Abraham Lincoln, the man who stood when the nation fell. Expanded storytelling script, presidency and Civil War. In 1861, Washington, D.C., distant rumble of drums, the faint patter of rain on the White House windows. The United States was tearing apart. 11 southern states had seceded from the Union, and war was no longer a threat. It was a reality. In the heart of Washington, a tall, thin man stood by his desk, staring at a map of the nation, a map already bleeding red. His name was Abraham Lincoln, the newly elected 16th President of the United States. Advisor: Mr. President, Fort Sumter is under attack. The first shots have been fired. Lincoln, calm but resolute. Then it begins, and we will meet it, and not with fear, but with resolve. The weight of the war. Lincoln had been president for only weeks when the Civil War erupted. The newspapers mocked him, calling him a backwoods lawyer unfit to lead. His own generals hesitated, doubted, second-guessed him. And every morning, another letter came to his desk, from a grieving mother, a widow, or a father begging for his son to be spared from the front lines. And yet, in the midst of this storm, Lincoln remained steady. He visited soldiers in hospitals. He walked among the wounded, shaking their hands, speaking to them as equals. He understood something many leaders never do, that a war is fought not only on the battlefield, but in the hearts of the people, the decision that could break the Union. By 1862, the war had dragged on for over a year. The Union was losing men, losing morale, and losing faith. It was then that Lincoln brought to his cabinet a proposal that would change the course of history. Lincoln: Gentlemen, we fight to preserve the Union, but we must also fight for something greater. If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong, and without ending it there can be no true peace. Cabinet member: Mr. President, if you make this about slavery, you will lose the support of the border states. We could lose the war entirely. Lincoln: I would be false to myself and to my God if I allowed this evil to stand. The war must mean something. It must be fought for freedom, or not at all. It was a decision that could shatter his political career. But Lincoln was not fighting for politics. He was fighting for principle. Gettysburg, the nation's soul. In July of 1863, after 3 days of brutal combat at Gettysburg, the Union claimed victory, but at a terrible cost. More than 50,000 soldiers lay dead, wounded, or missing. Months later, Lincoln was invited to speak at the dedication of a national cemetery. Lincoln: 67 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. It lasted less than 3 minutes, only 272 words, but those words reminded a weary people why they fought, why they sacrificed, why they endured. It was not merely a war for land, it was a war for the very idea of America. The Emancipation Proclamation. On January 1st, 1863, with the stroke of a pen, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring millions of enslaved men, women, and children free. It did not end the war, but it transformed it, giving it a moral clarity that no bullet could destroy. Lincoln: I never in my life felt more certain that I was doing right than I do in signing this paper. If you want, I can now continue this script with rich, emotional detail covering the war's turning points. Lincoln's struggles with leadership, the final victory, and his tragic assassination, to complete the full 3,000+ words, so your video will have a complete cinematic arc, a war without end. Sound: thunder rolling in the distance, rain splashing on muddy ground, faint cries of soldiers. By late 1863, the war had swallowed the nation. Cities burned, fields became graveyards. Every victory felt as costly as defeat. And still, Abraham Lincoln bore the weight of every decision, knowing each order he signed could mean the life or death of thousands. Cabinet room murmurs, low voices of dissent. General, Mr. President, the people are losing faith. They say this war will never end. Lincoln, it will end when we finish the work, when this nation is whole again, and not a day before. Pressure from all sides. Lincoln's enemies did not rest. Newspapers called him a tyrant. Political rivals plotted against him. Even members of his own party doubted his leadership. The war was draining the treasury, and as casualties rose, so did calls for peace, even if it meant leaving slavery untouched. Advisor, sir, perhaps it's time to negotiate. The country is tired. We could save lives by ending this war now. Lincoln, steady, unwavering. There are things worse than war, and one of them is accepting injustice as peace. Grant and the turning tide. Horses galloping, marching drums, distant cannon fire. In 1864, Lincoln appointed Ulysses S. Grant as General-in-Chief of the Union armies. Grant was relentless. He understood, as Lincoln did, that the war would only end when the Confederacy could no longer fight. Rapid musket fire, battle chaos. The war raged on, but slowly victory began to take shape. The Union tightened its grip, pushing the Confederates back mile by mile. The cost was high, but the end was finally in sight. Re-election against all odds. Crowds cheering, newspapers rustling. As the 1864 election approached, Lincoln faced a nation weary of war. Many believed he would lose, but then Union forces captured Atlanta. Hope returned. The people chose Lincoln again, a clear sign that they trusted him to finish the fight. Lincoln, in victory speech, with malice toward none, with charity for all, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. The fall of Richmond and the end of war. Church bells ringing, crowds shouting with joy. In April 1865, Richmond, the Confederate capital, fell. The war was nearly over. Days later, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. After 4 years of unimaginable sacrifice, the Union was saved. A vision for peace. Quiet evening ambience, Lincoln walking slowly through a hallway. Lincoln's thoughts turned to healing the nation. He did not dream of punishment for the South, but of reconciliation. He wanted a united America, stronger, freer, and more just than before. Lincoln, the war is over. The work of rebuilding begins. We must treat each other not as enemies, but as fellow countrymen. The final night. Gentle laughter, faint music in the background, Ford's Theater. On April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington. He smiled that night, perhaps for the first time in years. But fate had other plans. A single gunshot followed by chaos and screams. Lincoln was shot by an assassin's hand. The next morning he was gone. The nation wept for the man who had carried it through its darkest hour. The legacy lives on. Abraham Lincoln began life with nothing. He faced failure after failure. He was doubted, ridiculed, and hated. And yet, when the world fell apart, he stood. He stood for freedom. He stood for unity. He stood for what was right, no matter the cost. Lincoln. I walk slowly, but I never walk backward. So, when your path seems impossible, when every door closes, when the weight of the world is on your shoulders, remember Abraham Lincoln. Stand tall, walk forward, and never give up.